Welcome to the Software Process and Measurement Cast number 651. I'm Tom Cagley, your host. Today, we talk to Dr. Eric Cole about cybersecurity and entrepreneurship. Most of you will have been on the edge of your seat while you track the news of the ransomware attack on the Colonial Pipeline. Security cannot be an afterthought. Remember, this is not a drill. This is not hype. And if you needed any more proof of the impact, look at what you paid for gasoline in the last week. Also, remember, pre-order Dr. Cole's new book, Cyber Crisis, link in the show notes. Dr. Cole is a world-renowned cybersecurity entrepreneur and founder of Secure Anchor Consulting. Eric understands the dangers of cybersecurity and knows how to build successful companies. I really do suggest looking at Dr. Cole's LinkedIn profile. It is vast, and he's done some really cool things. Today, Dr. Cole shares the many lessons learned from overcoming adversity and staying committed to your purpose. Dr. Cole focuses on security and innovation with a mission to make cyberspace safe in a world where it can be an unrecognized danger and threat. Are you ready to talk cybersecurity? It's time for the interview. Dr. Eric Cole, welcome to the Software Process and Measurement Cast.
Pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me.
Eric, this is excellent. I am really looking forward to this conversation. Before we dive in, because, I don't know, I am firmly convinced that everybody in the world has definitions for things, and if you get 20 people in a room, you'll get 25 or 26 definitions. What is cybersecurity before we dive into discussing it?
That is a great question, and it's funny you asked that because I posed that question 6 months on social media, and I was shocked people that worked in the field for 15 years couldn't answer the question. So here's my definition of cybersecurity. Cybersecurity is three things. First, it's about understanding and managing risk to your critical data, of that data being disclosed, altered, or denied access. So really what we're talking about is understanding what is your critical data and making a decision. What is the value and benefit? What is the risk and exposure? And is that value and benefit worth the risk or exposure? So to me, when I talk with whether it's software developers or executives, the way I do cybersecurity, it's always asking two questions. The first question people always ask, which is what is the value and benefit? So what is the value and benefit from the software, from doing agile development, from doing something really quick or fast? But the second question that's so critical, what is the negative, the downfall, the risk from doing this? And then it's real simple. Is the value and benefit worth the risk or exposure? If it is, do it. If it's not, don't. If you need to do it, but the risk is too high, we mitigate the overall risk. And to me, that's all cybersecurity is making sure people are informed and make educated decisions.
That's solid. I can buy that. Who defines that, though? I mean, if you asked, Joe Developer or somewhere along that lines versus someone in product, versus some executive, you might get different answers. Who owns that discussion?
That is the, no pun intended, $1 million, or I guess in some of these breaches, $5 million or $10 million question. It ultimately comes down to who is the decision maker in the organization. And then what it typically happens is it's based on that overall risk. So the way that I work security when I'm a CISO or a vCISO is when somebody wants to do something, if it's a developer or a manager or a director, I will go in and tell them, here's the risk, and here's whether I believe it to be acceptable or not. Mm-hmm. Now, if they decide that it's not, that they don't want to listen to me and they want to take that risk, here's the problem. The problem in most organizations is business leaders have all of the authority, but security has all the responsibility. So I've seen time and time again where in an organization, a vice president is going to roll out a new piece of software. And the security team says this is too big a risk, you can't do it. They basically, the vice president says, pound sand, you can't tell me what to do. They do it anyway. 6 months later, the system gets compromised the exact way the CISO said it was going to because of the risk. And then what does the organization do? They fire the CISO and they hire a new one. That is a flawed model because what it's doing, it's reinforcing bad behavior. So what I always do and recommend security professionals, if a vice president doesn't agree with security, they absolutely have the right to do that. But then what I do is I do a risk transfer where once a quarter, when I present to the executive team, we make them aware of those. So we tell them, listen, Mr. and Mrs. Executive, this vice president has every right to make this decision. We feel this was an unnecessary risk. They decided to do it anyway. We just want you to know that we transferred that risk. So now what it does is it gives a checks and balance. Now the executive team can look at that and say, yeah, we don't agree, kill the project. Or they can go in and say, okay, we wish they didn't do that, but we'll accept that. So now if and when a breach occurs, they know that it was on the vice president and not on security. So to me, there does need to be checks and balances within the organization.
That sounds like it almost gets pushed up, that risk sharing or, risk deferral gets pushed all the way up to the board level, or at least can.
That is correct, because right now, today, it's such an immature area. Even though security, some people get so mad at me, they're like, Eric, security's been around for 40 years. I've been doing it for 30 years. I agree. But it's one of those things that just because it's been around for a long time doesn't mean it's been. I'm the perfect example of that. Is if you talk to my wife, she will tell you that she has 4 children. And they go, you only have 3. And she's like, no, my 50-year-old, he acts like a 15-year-old. So just because you're old doesn't mean you're mature, right? So I'm a perfect example of that. So to me, we've never put the processes in place like we've done with IT and other areas. So there aren't any security metrics within an organization. And until we start getting more breaches and organizations get more aware of it, where they're going to push down what is and is not acceptable. Right now, today, yes, you're right. A lot of these decisions that seem pretty small do get pushed up much higher in the organization than they should.
The worry with pushing things up that high is, especially smaller ones, is that if people become numb to them or they don't understand them. So it's harder to make the right decision. How would you do it right? What would right look like?
To me, what right looks like is you have a set of non-negotiables that everyone agrees with, and then they can go in and move forward. This is something I've had a lot of success working, integrating security into DevOps, which, as you know, with DevOps, you can't wait 2 weeks for a change control board. You can't wait 3 months. So what we do there is, it's sometimes very simple, and it's this. Any system or server that's going to be directly accessible from the internet, it must be fully patched within 10 days, and it never contains critical data. As long as you follow those rules, I'm good. Because right now, today, a lot of people love going in and saying advanced threats, foreign adversaries, the boogeyman's going to get you. But I'll tell you, I've looked at every single one of the major breaches that have happened, and every single one of them, when you talk in large data breach, visible system from the internet that they didn't know about, missing patches contain critical data that wasn't encrypted. So the way I approach security is, yes, let's focus on the current threat, which is that. So you create those non-negotiables. And I actually when I work with DevOps, I give them a 3-tier model that says, okay, here's your front end, here's a middleware tier, here's what the software looks like, and then your data's on the back end. And anytime somebody from the internet needs to access critical data, it has to go through the front end, the middleware, the back end. And I'll give you any examples you want of how to do that. As long as you're following that, go for it. So now they have a structure and a swim lane. They have non-negotiable rules. And then anything else that they want to do is really going to be very minute when it comes to security. So I'm not worried about that.
Do frameworks like the new one from Carnegie Mellon, the CMMC, do those help, or do those sort of get in the way?
If, always the big if, right?
Of course.
If they're actually followed and understood, they do help a lot. Here's my problem with most frameworks. They're too complicated to scale, and most of the folks that need to make real-time decisions aren't trained on the framework. So the new Carnegie Mellon framework, I've gone into organizations that have passed that and they're fully certified. And I've walked up to developers and I've asked them about it. They're like, Eric, what are you talking about? I've never been given any training. I don't know. So the issue is it tends to be a checkbox done at a managerial level, but it's never pushed down to the engineers. So yes, if all of our engineers are trained and they understood it and they fully follow it, they can do it. But the problem I said is it's way too complex. That's why my model, where it's just 3 or 4 simple things that developers do, because let's face it, I've been a developer. When you're a developer, you're given unrealistic expectations. You're asked to produce magical things, and you're never given enough time. So if you now go in and tell this developer that already has to work 20-hour days, when I was developing at the agency, most months, probably 4 or 5 days, I slept in my office just because 4 hours sleep and you're working 20-hour days. And you're now telling them that they have to slow down, do all this extra stuff, do things that are going to make their job take 3 times. It's not going to happen. Right. You have to understand the audience. And until that changes, which I don't see it anytime soon, we need to make it very simple and very easy for the developers to be able to follow.
The world, unfortunately, that we live in, especially when it comes to data and breaches and things, is just mayhem these days. Know that I've gotten my security data from the government stolen a couple of times in the past few years, just for giggles, right? Is this avoidable, or is this just because of the way we're doing this? Is this always going to be around?
It's going to be around because people don't understand the importance of cybersecurity until after the fact. I always show cybersecurity is like insurance. It's like alarm systems. It's all that stuff. People don't think it's going to happen to them. Mm-hmm. I'm sure you know this, but what's the number one reason somebody installs an alarm system in their home?
They got burglarized.
Or a friend, right?
Yeah.
A friend. So most of this stuff is reactionary. So people don't think they're going to be a target. And therefore, they let down their guard. All these government breaches and these other big data breaches, I'll tell you why it happened. These systems, when they were designed, were air-gapped. And an air gap means the systems that contain classified, critical, personal information are never connected to internet-facing systems. It's literally an air gap. Mm-hmm. So unless somebody physically breaches the parameter. That's why you saw in the 80s and 90s for the Russians to compromise the CIA or the FBI, they needed Aldrich Ames, Robert Hansen. They had to physically put somebody inside. But here's what happened. And it's similar to what you said in the beginning. People redefine terms. So somebody said, you know something, this air gap is too complex because now we have to walk across the room. We have to move things. It's too hard to do. So let's go in and connect these air gap systems to the internet. The funniest and scariest thing I ever heard was last year, I was on a panel with a CIO and he goes, Eric, we have proper security. All of our systems that are connected to the internet are air gapped. I'm like, wait, you can't use those two terms together. Like I said, an air gap system explicitly says no connection to the internet. If it's connected to the internet, it can't be an air gap. But we're just making stuff up, right? Because these executives have heard air gap equals security. So as long as you say air gap, they think security, and we're making up stuff as we go along. So that's really the fundamental problem, is we're not following the rules. If these entities kept the air gaps in place the way they were supposed to, most of these breaches you've seen would not have happened. They would not have occurred. So they are preventable. And as I mentioned earlier, all of the large data breaches today are internet-facing systems that shouldn't be. These were previously air-gapped, missing patches, because an air-gap system, you don't have to patch because it's less of a risk. So they're unpatched for a reason. Now we put them on the internet, they're unpatched, and they contain critical data that's not properly encrypted. So if we either kept systems air-gapped or we patched all of our systems and removed critical data, we'd be in much, much better shape. But here's the real problem. And this hit me about 6 months ago. I was looking at this large hotel chain that had 500 million records compromised. And I'm sitting there saying, come on, Tom, do we really think that they had no patching, they had no data. I mean, that would be absurd. They spend $50 million a year on security. They have 300 people on their security team. But what I realized is what I call the rule of 90%. And the rule of 90% is this: 90% of their systems were patched. 90% of their data was encrypted. 90% of their systems were secure. But we know if you have 100 systems and you're at 90%, that's still 10 systems that are exposed. So that's the problem. We're doing it good enough, but we're not getting 100%. And with today's adversary, you need to have 100% asset inventory, 100% patching, and 100% control of your data.
The answer is easy. I'm not going to guess as to how complex the implementation would have to be. But let's assume that it's doable. If we know what the answer is, why don't we just do it? Because it's expensive.
It's expensive, but I would say the real issue is people do not believe it's a big enough threat.
Well, what I meant when I said expensive wasn't that it was expensive to do. It probably is, but it's expensive having to give everybody protection, because you got compromised, and then do it again over here, and then pay out the lawyers. And I mean, this stuff actually probably builds up to real money fairly quickly.
It does. And you just nailed the fundamental problem, which is that number is never properly articulated. So I go into an example today, and I tell a client, you're at risk and you need to spend $3 million to secure and protect your critical data, to go in and secure those applications. And what they're thinking is, if I do nothing, if I don't listen to Eric, it's zero. If I listen to Eric, it's 3 million. So if I have a decision between 0 or 3 million, you're going to pick 0. The problem is that's not accurate. The more accurate would be that we don't do a good job with is go, okay, if you do nothing based on everything we know, you have an 80% chance over the next 2 years of having a breach that's going to cost you $20 million. Or you can spend $3 million and minimize that. Now, option 1 is 80% chance of a $20 million loss. Option 2 is 3 million. Now it's a different decision. I always joke with folks when I brief executives, I always get the money because I'm presenting both sides and their awareness is like, yes, we need to do this. Problem is so many times folks only argue the negative. They don't give the other avenue. So therefore the executives don't realize they are in a sitting time bomb and don't realize it.
So it ends up being an afterthought. And so we have to clean up stuff after the fact. In your experience, organizations that have been hit once, I should actually ask my local city who had dealt with a bit of ransomware. But, the question is, do they clean up afterwards? Or does a good near-death experience, does it actually get them on the right path? Or do they stray immediately?
It's one where I wish we knew the correct answer, which is not.
Oh, no.
So what happens is this. They're so focused on cleaning up the mess and getting back up and running that they end up implementing the exact same infrastructure that was there before. So they're so focused on getting up and running, they never fix the problem. And then once again, incomplete data. So you have a breach, you get hit with ransomware. You can get up and running to your identical way before with all the vulnerabilities in 3 weeks. Or we can get you up and running, clean, secure in 6 weeks. The executives between 3 weeks and 6 weeks, they don't want to be out of operation. So they're going to pick 3 weeks. And then they say, oh, we'll fix it afterwards. And then as soon as they're up and running, they go, oh, lightning never strikes twice. Because we were hit, it's never going to happen. And then they go in and ignore it. But then here's the bigger problem that people don't realize. When the attacker comes back the second time, they know how they were caught the first time. So they're going to be a lot more stealthier. So here's what happens the first time. Now, ransomware is a little different because it's visible, but most ransomware attacks before the ransomware was activated and the visible component kicked in, those companies on average are compromised for 18 months before it ever gets activated. So now what we see happening is these companies get back up and running. The adversary comes back in, they're much more stealthy, and it now takes them the second time, typically 30 to 40 months to catch them. So many of our clients right now today are like, Eric, we're good. And they're not, they're just not looking in the right spot.
Yeah, maybe, money under the mattress. You're not making me feel happy here, Eric. And maybe that's the point, right? This is fairly serious. It isn't going away. Is it better than it was, at least? Can you give us that? Is it at least? Obviously it probably isn't, right? Everybody, as of March, like 90% of the people decided that they would not go to work and then go home and start using other real unsecure avenues into the work. But before that, if we pass that aside, are we getting any better at this?
So I promise you, I will give you some good news.
Oh, good. Thank you.
It won't be here, but I'll get there. So no, it's not getting any better. And the way attackers are getting in are easier and easier because we're letting our guard down. So here's the good news. The good news is today, to fix and stop the current level of attacks we're calling advanced attacks is not very difficult and not very hard. That's sort of the good news, because we're going in and so many attacks have happened that it's getting easier and easier. Most attacks, like I said, are unpatched systems. So you just go in and start patching internet-facing systems, which isn't hard to do, and you've stopped the current vector. Now, removing critical data from internet-facing systems, that's hard, because you got to redesign everything. But to me, if we just start doing a simple thing, asset inventory for internet-facing systems, and we start patching all of those systems, that solves a big problem. The other way to solve it that we're rolling out with clients, as you said, I always love asking CIOs and executives, how many new offices did you open up in 2020? And the initial response is, Eric, we closed off. We closed 4 of our main offices. We did you know where I'm going.
Yeah,
and
I do.
I
Yeah.
say, how many people are now working from home in 2020 that weren't? Oh, 30,000. And I go, you realize you opened 30,000 remote offices? And it's like, wait for it, right? And boom, it clicks, and they realize it. So yes, the home system, these laptops with 4 terabyte hard drives, is the biggest threat out there. So what we're doing now with the clients, it's a little bit of work, but not a lot, is rolling out thin clients, taking away the hard drives. Now you get a new operating system every day. It's fully patched, it's fully up to date. All the data is centrally stored, centrally located. And now, even if you got hit with ransomware or malware, where that's the sources at a client, you have no local data and you have no direct access. So now that solves a lot of the problems. So to me, what I'm telling my clients is the next 6 or 9 months, if you can patch all internet-facing systems and you can roll out thin clients to your endpoint, you are in really good shape of taking away the current threats.
Interesting, because I'm older than you are, and I remember these things called 3270 terminals, dumb terminals, which were thin clients. So that scares me just a little bit. Over at least my career, I have heard over and over, read lots of different places, we should be patching. What's the deal? Why is this such a hard concept? I know. Well, no, I don't know anymore, mainly because we don't go in and hack into systems so that the code's different. We don't have to rework with that. So most of that's just package stuff. Why aren't we patching?
To me, it goes back to in the 70s and 80s when I was growing up, the whole seatbelt issue, where putting on a seatbelt is easy. It's simple, it's not hard, but people didn't think there was a real threat. They didn't think they would get into an accident, so they got sloppy. And they just didn't put on the seatbelt. To me, patching is the same way. And in 1990, when I was a professional hacker for the government, and the number one way of getting in was unpatched systems, if you told me in 2020 that was still going to be the case, I would have said you're crazy. I mean, there's no possible. But the issue comes down to not a priority. And I think the other big issue we see with clients is very sloppy configuration management. They don't know the software on the system, so you can't patch it. So to me, if we just started doing some basic configuration management, basic patching, a lot of this stuff is just basic blocking and tackling, but organizations are missing the foundational life.
Eric, this has been Absolutely marvelous, though I don't think I'm going to sleep tonight. If you woke up tomorrow morning, somebody handed you a cup of coffee and a magic wand and said that you could fix any two problems that would rid the world or help rid the world of this cybersecurity morass, what would they be and why?
So the first one would be organizations understand and hire a proper CISO, proper Chief Information Security Officer. To me today, the Chief Information Security Officer position is really viewed as a technical advancement for world-class engineers, and that's a mistake. Technical people are awesome, but a strategic thinker is needed in the organization. Most of these problems we've mentioned on this interview are because there's not a chief strategist focusing on cybersecurity. So my first thing would be going in and having Chief Information Security Officers that are business executives that understand the business and the organization and start putting in proper strategies in place. And then the second one would normally have been patching, but we talked about that. So I'm going to take my magic wand to do a second one, since I think I wish that on everyone. So the second one, if we don't count patching, would be two-factor authentication. Passwords didn't work in the 90s. They're not working today. We have technology to do strong, robust authentication. A lot of the way we see attacks coming in, and here's another good news, is you probably do because you understand tech, but for any of your personal banking, e-commerce, credit cards, or anything else, if you're not using two-factor authentication, do that immediately, because that's the number one way attackers are getting in. So the second wish would be that everybody uses two-factor. That becomes the norm, that becomes the standard, and passwords go away.
So Eric, this is, as I said, this has been marvelous. Yeah, you can do this anytime. How would people continue the conversation? How would they find out about you, your organization?
To find out more information, secure-anchor.com. That's our company website. But I love giving to the community, giving free content. So if you go on any social media platform, more on YouTube and LinkedIn, a little bit on Facebook, and I think the only reason I'm on Instagram is so my teenage kids could be like, "That's my dad." I don't think there's clients there, but just DRERICCOLE, Dr. Eric Cole. So if you just look up Dr. Eric Cole, you'll find a lot of my content. And for those interested in security leadership, on YouTube, I do a Life of a CISO podcast every week. So I give tips and tricks on what you need to do to become a world-class Chief Information Security Officer.
Well, I will definitely call that out and have all of that contact and links to the podcast in the show notes. Is there anything else that you'd like to promote? The platform is yours.
The only other thing I would promote, and thank you for that opportunity, is May of this year, my new book, Cyber Crisis, is coming out, which really focuses on cybersecurity for executives. It's a lot of these topics at a strategic level. So if you or your executives want to better understand cybersecurity, head over to Amazon or any of your favorite sites and pre-order Cyber Crisis.
Super. And in May, perhaps you'll come back and tell us a little bit about the book.
I would love that. If that's an offer, I accept. So thank you.
That was a request. Eric, this has been marvelous. Thank you again. Yeah, this has really been cool. Thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you.
The Software Process and Measurement Cast is a proud media sponsor of the Global Scrum Master Summit, which starts tomorrow. Link in the show notes. Still time to get a ticket. In Reread Saturday News, Chapter 14 in Fixing Your Scrum, Practical Solutions to Common Scrum Problems by Ryan Ripley and Todd Miller shines a spotlight on the sprint review. This event is geared to generating feedback to help the team and organization deliver value. We're getting close to the end of the book, and I would like your input on what to tackle next. There's a poll in the show notes to collect your ideas. Remember, if you've not bought your copy of Fixing Your Scrum or any of the earlier books in the Reread Saturday series, check out the links in the show notes, buy a copy, support the podcast, the blog, and most importantly, support the authors. In the next Software Process and Measurement Cast, I talk with Rick Martin about intellectual property and why everyone involved in software needs to understand how IP law can impact the value they deliver. Copyrights, patents, trademarks, and trade secrets are all part of protecting intellectual property. If process improvement is a never-ending journey, why do so many people ask, are we there yet?